Sell the house or die alone in it, my daughter shouted on my 70th birthday. The words sliced through the dining room so sharply that even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to stop ticking. For a moment nobody moved. Not my son-in-law Daniel, frozen beside the wine cabinet with a half-filled glass in his hand. Not my grandson Tyler, staring down at his mashed potatoes like he suddenly found them fascinating. Not even my sister Elaine, who had spent the last hour complimenting the hydrangeas in my backyard. Everyone just sat there in silence. And me? I simply folded my napkin into my lap and looked at the birthday candles melting into my cake. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes I wonder how far pain can travel before it finally finds someone who understands it. The dining room smelled faintly of rosemary chicken and vanilla frosting. I had spent 2 days preparing that dinner. At 70 years old, I still believed birthdays were supposed to bring families closer together. Maybe that was my first mistake. Outside the bay windows, the Texas evening was settling over the neighborhood in soft orange light. The same neighborhood Harold and I had moved into 42 years earlier with 1 station wagon, 2 folding chairs, and a baby girl named Rebecca sleeping in the back seat. That baby girl was now glaring at me from across the table like I was a stranger who had overstayed her welcome. Rebecca, Daniel whispered carefully, maybe this isn't the time. No, she snapped without looking at him. It's exactly the time. Her diamond bracelet clinked against the table as she crossed her arms. I notice little things in moments like that. Maybe age teaches you where the truth hides. It hides in tightened jaws, in forced smiles, in the way someone refuses to meet your eyes after saying something cruel. The candles flickered between us. 7 candles. 1 for every decade. I reached forward and quietly blew them out before the wax spilled onto the cake. Nobody sang after that. The silence became unbearable. Finally, Elaine cleared her throat. Rebecca, honey, your mother worked very hard on tonight. Rebecca laughed once. Short, sharp, empty. That's the problem, she said. She works hard for a house that's too big, too expensive, and honestly ridiculous for one person. I looked down at my hands. The veins stood out more than they used to. Harold used to kiss my knuckles sometimes while we watched television at night. Said my hands were proof of a life well lived. Now they just looked old beneath the dining room chandelier. I'm managing fine, I said quietly. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. You're 70, Mom. There was something about the way she said Mom that hurt more than if she called me nothing at all. You can barely handle the stairs anymore. Last month you slipped watering flowers outside. I didn't fall, I replied softly. I tripped over the hose. That's not better. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should talk about this another day. No, Rebecca said again, because nobody else will say it. Her eyes landed on me, cold and impatient. You need to sell this house. There it was. The real conversation. Not birthday cake. Not family dinner. Not 70 candles glowing warmly while grandchildren laughed. This. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Harold had built this dining room with his own hands. Every crown molding. Every cabinet. He spent 3 summers finishing the hardwood floors because contractors were too expensive back then. This house wasn't just property. It was our life. I'm not selling, I said carefully. Rebecca exhaled through her nose like she was speaking to a stubborn child. You can't stay here forever. Why does that bother you so much? The question slipped out before I could stop it. That finally made her angry. Her face hardened instantly. Because I'm tired, Mom, she said. I'm tired of pretending this situation makes sense. You're sitting in a 4-bedroom house while normal people can barely afford mortgages. Normal people. I almost smiled at that. Rebecca and Daniel owned 2 SUVs, a lake cabin outside Austin, and had just returned from a 10-day vacation in Italy 3 months earlier. But somehow my home was the problem. Tyler quietly pushed peas around his plate without speaking. Poor boy. Children always know when love leaves a room. I'm not asking you for money, I said. No, but eventually you will. Rebecca stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You know what? Fine. Stay here. Sit in this giant empty house surrounded by old memories. But don't expect me to clean up the mess later. Rebecca. Daniel warned. But she was already crying now. Not soft tears. Angry tears. "You either sell the house," she shouted, "or die alone in it." The room went completely still. Even she looked surprised after saying it. I stared at my daughter across the birthday table. The little girl who once slept beside me during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried into my shoulder after her first heartbreak. The woman I had defended, forgiven, protected. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. I no longer recognized her. Rebecca grabbed her purse from the counter. "Come on, Tyler." "Mom," Tyler whispered nervously. "Now." Daniel mouthed a quiet apology to me before following them toward the front door. A moment later, the house shook with the sound of it slamming shut. Silence returned. Elaine slowly reached for my hand across the table. "Oh, Evelyn." But I barely heard her. Because for the first time all evening, I noticed something sitting beside Rebecca's abandoned wine glass. A folder. Thin. White. And across the front, in bold black letters, were the words, "Property Evaluation Report." The house felt unbearably quiet after they left. Not peaceful quiet. Not the comforting kind Harold used to love on Sunday mornings while reading the newspaper beside the kitchen window. This silence felt wounded. Elaine stayed for another 20 minutes, nervously drying already clean dishes while pretending not to watch me. I could feel her concern moving around the kitchen like another living thing. "You want me to stay tonight?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "No, honey. I'm all right." It was a lie. But at 70 years old, you learn that people only know what to do with clean pain. Quiet pain. The kind that doesn't spill onto the carpet or interrupt dinner. Elaine kissed my cheek before leaving. "Call me if you need anything." After the front door closed behind her, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the birthday cake. 7 untouched slices. The candles had burned into little puddles of wax across the frosting. I carried the cake to the refrigerator slowly, my knees aching with every step. Harold always teased me for moving too fast even after retirement. "Evie," he'd laugh, "you walk through this house like you're late for work." Now there was nobody left to tease me. I closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it longer than necessary. The house creaked softly. Around me, old homes breathe at night. Harold used to say that too. I wandered back into the dining room and looked at the folder Rebecca had left behind. Property Evaluation Report. The words sat there beneath the chandelier like a threat. For a long moment I didn't touch it. Part of me already knew opening that folder would change something inside me permanently. Still I reached for it. The papers inside were neatly organized. Market estimates. Realtor contact information. Notes written in Rebecca's handwriting along the margins. Minor renovations could increase value by $80,000. Ideal timing before winter market slows. Possible senior communities nearby. Senior communities. I sat down slowly in Harold's chair at the head of the table. My chest tightened so sharply I had to press a hand against it. This wasn't frustration. This wasn't concern for my health. My daughter had been planning my exit. For how long? I looked around the dining room. The china cabinet Harold built after Rebecca was born. The faded curtains I'd sewn myself 20 years ago. The tiny scratch near the hallway where Rebecca crashed her bicycle indoors when she was 12. Every inch of this house carried our fingerprints. And somehow my own daughter looked at it and only saw money. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything. Instead, I just felt tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after loving someone for too long without realizing they stopped loving you back. Upstairs, the bedroom felt colder than usual. Harold's side of the bed remained untouched except for the folded blue sweater. I still couldn't bring myself to move. It had been 11 months since his heart attack. 11 months since I found him collapsed beside the garage workbench. Sometimes I still woke up expecting to hear his cough downstairs. Grief is strange that way. It trains your heart to keep waiting for someone who isn't coming home. I changed into my nightgown slowly and sat on the edge of the mattress. That was when my phone buzzed. Rebecca. For one foolish second, relief rushed through me. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she was apologizing. Maybe somewhere underneath the anger and sharpness, my little girl was still there. I answered immediately. "Rebecca." Silence. Then a long sigh. "Mom." I shouldn't have yelled. I closed my eyes. "It's all right." No, it's not. Her voice sounded exhausted now rather than angry. But you make everything so difficult. There it was again. Not concern. Annoyance. Like my existence had become an inconvenience she needed solved. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said quietly. You don't understand what this looks like from my side. I almost laughed at that. From her side. She was 50 years old with a successful real estate business, a husband, a healthy son, vacations, investments, and a lake cabin. I was a widow sitting alone beside a half-melted birthday cake. Yet somehow she was the one suffering. You scared Tyler tonight, I said softly. Rebecca exhaled sharply. Please don't make me the villain here. The words settled heavily into the silence between us. Then she lowered her voice. Daniel and I have been talking, and honestly, this house could change our lives too. I froze. There it was. Finally honest. Not hidden behind concern for my safety or conversations about stairs and loneliness. Money. Pure and simple. We could pay off debt. Help Tyler with college. Invest properly. Mom, you're sitting on nearly $2 million. $2 million. Hearing my home reduced to a number made me feel physically ill. This was your father's home, I whispered. And Dad is gone. The sentence hit harder than her screaming had. Gone. As if Harold's absence automatically erased my place here too. You can't stay trapped in the past forever, she continued. At some point you need to think practically. Practically. Such a cold little word. I looked toward Harold's empty side of the bed. I am thinking practically, I said carefully. And what does that mean? For the first time that night something inside me shifted. Small. Quiet. But real. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I think, I said slowly, it means I need to start being very careful about who I trust. The silence on the other end turned immediate and sharp. Mom. What's that supposed to mean? I stared at the dark hallway outside my bedroom. Then my eyes drifted back toward the folder sitting downstairs. The property evaluation. The senior housing brochures tucked inside. The handwritten notes. And suddenly a terrible thought entered my mind. What else had my daughter been planning behind my back? I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house seemed louder after Rebecca's phone call. The refrigerator humming downstairs. The branches scratching lightly against the bedroom windows. The old pipes knocking somewhere behind the walls Harold once promised to replace but never did. By 3 a.m, I gave up pretending to rest. I wrapped myself in Harold's old gray cardigan and walked downstairs barefoot. The hardwood floors felt cold beneath my feet. I paused halfway through the staircase, looking into the dark living room below. Moonlight spilled across the furniture in pale silver streaks, turning familiar things into shadows. For the first time since Harold died, the house didn't feel comforting. It felt vulnerable, like something waiting to be taken. I moved into the kitchen and switched on the small light above the stove. Its soft yellow glow barely touched the corners of the room. The folder still sat on the dining table where I'd left it. I carried it back into the kitchen and read everything again more carefully this time. Property estimates. Mortgage comparisons. A printed list titled, Best Senior Living Options in North Texas. My stomach tightened. Rebecca hadn't exploded impulsively at dinner. This had been building for months. Maybe longer. I turned another page and froze. There, clipped near the back, was a handwritten calculation. House sale estimate. $1.9 projected split after taxes/investments. Lake property upgrade Tyler College fund business expansion. Not one line mentioned me. Not retirement plans for her mother. Not assisted care. Not where I would live. Just their future. Built from the sale of my life. I slowly lowered the paper onto the table. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Texas storms always moved in fast at night. Harold used to love sitting on the porch during rainstorms with a cup of black coffee. Said storms reminded him that nature didn't apologize for being powerful. I missed him so much in moments like this. Not just because I loved him, but because he would have known exactly what to do. My eyes wandered toward the kitchen window above the sink. Rain had started now. Thin streaks against the glass. Then suddenly, headlights swept across the front yard. I frowned. Who would be here at 3:30 in the morning? A black SUV slowed in front of the house. My pulse quickened slightly. For one strange moment, I thought maybe Rebecca had come back to apologize in person. But the vehicle didn't stop. It rolled slowly past the house before disappearing down the street. Still, unease settled deep into my chest. I checked the front door lock twice before finally returning upstairs. The next morning arrived gray and humid. I woke with a headache pressing behind my eyes and the heavy feeling that none of yesterday had been a dream. The birthday decorations still hung sadly around the dining room. Gold ribbons, paper lanterns, a giant 70 balloon tilting sideways near the fireplace. I started taking them down one by one. That was when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. 8:12 a.m. Too early for neighbors. Too early for casual visits. When I opened the door, I found a young man standing on the porch holding a clipboard. He smiled politely. "Morning, ma'am. I'm looking for Evelyn Carter." "That's me." "Great. I'm here for the property photography appointment." My stomach dropped. "The what?" He checked his clipboard. "Photography for the listing package. Scheduled for this morning at 8:15. Listing package. For a second, I genuinely couldn't speak. "There must be some mistake," I said carefully. The young man frowned. "I was hired through Carter and Blake Realty yesterday afternoon. Rebecca's real estate company." I felt heat rise slowly into my chest. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Something steadier. "She scheduled this without my permission," I said quietly. The photographer immediately looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom," I assumed. "It's all right," I interrupted gently. "None of this is your fault." He nodded awkwardly before retreating down the porch steps. "I'll mark the appointment canceled." I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I closed the front door very slowly. My hands trembled now. Not from fear. From realization. Rebecca truly believed the house already belonged to her. She wasn't waiting for my decision. She was moving forward without it. I walked back into the kitchen and stared at Harold's old coffee mug drying beside the sink. For years, I had excused Rebecca's behavior. She's stressed. She's overwhelmed. She doesn't mean it that way. That's what mothers do sometimes. We rewrite cruelty into exhaustion because the truth hurts too much. But standing there in my kitchen, something finally became impossible to ignore. My daughter wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to remove me. The phone rang again around noon. "Rebecca." I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom, did the photographer come by?" "No apology. No pretending." Straight to business. "Yes." A pause. "And?" I sent him away. Silence exploded between us. "You what?" "You heard me." Her breathing sharpened instantly. "Mom, do you understand how embarrassing that is for me professionally?" "Professionally. Not emotionally. Not morally. Professionally. I never agreed to sell the house. You don't need to make this harder than it has to be." There was that tone again. Patient. Condescending. Like speaking to someone mentally fragile. I suddenly remembered something strange Harold once told me about 6 months before he died. We had been sitting on the back patio after dinner while Rebecca and Daniel argued quietly inside about money. Harold stared into his coffee for a long time before saying, "Promise me something, Evie." "What?" "If anything ever happens to me, don't let people pressure you out of this house." At the time I laughed it off. Now, standing in my kitchen with my daughter breathing angrily through the phone, the memory sent chills through me. "Mom," Rebecca snapped. "Are you listening?" I looked toward the hallway where Harold's framed photographs still lined the wall. Then I answered calmly, "Yes." "And for the first time," I said quietly, "I think your father knew exactly who you were becoming." Top of form after I hung up the phone, I stood motionless in the kitchen for a long time. The rain outside had stopped, but gray clouds still pressed heavily against the windows. The whole house felt dim and tired, as though it had overheard every word between my daughter and me. I walked slowly into the hallway. Harold's photographs covered the wall exactly the way he liked them. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Rebecca holding up her first-grade spelling trophy with missing front teeth and a crooked ponytail. I touched the edge of that frame gently. How does a child become someone you no longer recognize? The question followed me all afternoon. By evening, I found myself drifting upstairs to the attic. I hadn't gone up there since Harold's funeral. The pull-down ladder groaned as I climbed carefully, my knees protesting with each step. Dust floated through the narrow beam of light from the attic bulb. The air smelled like cardboard, cedarwood, and old memories. Boxes lined the walls in careful rows Harold had labeled himself years ago. Christmas decorations. Rebecca's school projects. Family photos. I knelt slowly beside one marked Home Documents. My fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside were decades of our life. Together. Insurance papers. Tax records. Old mortgage statements from the 80s when we could barely afford groceries after making house payments. I smiled faintly remembering those years. Back then, Harold worked double shifts at the electrical plant while I waitressed evenings at a diner off Route 75. Some nights we passed each other in the driveway like strangers changing places in the same exhausting dream. But we survived. Together. And every paycheck, every sacrifice, every skipped vacation built this home piece by piece. Rebecca never saw those years. Children rarely understand what their parents quietly survive for them. At the bottom of the box, I found a yellow envelope in Harold's handwriting. For Evie. My breath caught instantly. Slowly I opened it. Inside was a folded letter. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I unfolded it beneath the attic light. Evie, if you're reading this, then I'm probably gone, and knowing you're trying to carry everything alone again. A weak laugh escaped me despite the ache in my chest. That sounded exactly like him. I kept reading. This house belongs to you as much as it ever belonged to me. Don't let anybody make you feel otherwise. Not even family. My eyes blurred suddenly. Harold's handwriting tilted slightly near the bottom of the page, shakier than usual. I've watched people change when money gets involved, especially after loss. Grief makes some people softer. Others become hungry. Hungry. The word sat heavily in my chest. I continued reading slowly. Rebecca loves you in her own way. But she started looking at this house differently. I noticed it before my surgery. The questions about property taxes. Market values. Equity. I stopped breathing for a moment. He knew. Even before he died, he knew. The attic suddenly felt colder. One sentence near the bottom made my hands tighten around the paper. Promise me you'll stay where you feel safe for as long as you choose. This home is your life, Evie. Not theirs to divide. Tears finally slipped down my face then. Not loud sobbing. Just silent tears falling onto dusty cardboard boxes in a dim attic filled with 40 years of marriage. I missed him so much it physically hurt. Not just my husband. My witness. The one person who understood every version of me before age and grief stripped everything down to survival. I pressed the letter carefully against my chest and closed my eyes. Below me the house creaked softly. Alive. Still alive. And suddenly memories started flooding back faster than I could stop them. Rebecca at 6 years old running barefoot through the backyard sprinkler, while Harold grilled hamburgers on the patio. Rebecca at 16 screaming that she hated us because we wouldn't let her go to Florida for spring break with older friends. Rebecca crying in this very attic after her first serious breakup while I sat beside her for 3 straight hours. There had always been anger in her. Sharpness. Impatience. But Harold balanced it somehow. He softened her edges the way water smooths stones over time. After he died, something changed completely. At first it was subtle. She stopped asking how I was sleeping. Stopped staying long after visits. Then came little comments disguised as concern. This place must be exhausting to clean. You know, a condo would simplify your life. Have you thought about assisted living communities? I thought she was worried about me. Now I understood. She was preparing me mentally to leave. My chest tightened again as another memory surfaced. 3 months after Harold's funeral, Rebecca insisted on helping organize paperwork in the downstairs office. At one point I walked in and caught her photographing documents with her phone. When I asked why, she smiled quickly. Just helping you stay organized. I believed her. God help me, I believed all of it. A loud crack of thunder startled me from the memory. Rain had started again outside. I carefully folded Harold's letter and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. Then I noticed something else inside the box. A second folder. Dark blue. Unlabeled. I frowned and opened it slowly. Inside were legal documents. trust paperwork, property records. And attached to the front with a yellow sticky note in Harold's handwriting were 5 words that made my stomach drop instantly. Show this to an 01. Top of form, bottom of form. I stared at the blue folder for nearly a full minute before touching it again. The attic suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Rain hammered steadily against the roof now, wrapping the house in that deep storm silence Texas gets right before nightfall. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the folder wider. Inside were neatly organized legal papers with Harold's signature across nearly every page. Trust agreements, property protections, bank information. And at the center of it all, one document clipped separately with a bold title across the top, Carter Family Trust. I lowered myself carefully onto an old storage trunk nearby. My knees felt weak. Harold had never hidden financial things from me, but he handled most of the legal paperwork himself. He used to joke that contracts gave me headaches after 5 minutes. Maybe he was right. But now I forced myself to read every line carefully. Outside, thunder rolled again. The trust listed our home, savings accounts, investment portfolios, and even the lake property Harold inherited from his brother years ago. I blinked hard. Rebecca had no idea about the lake property. Neither did Daniel. We almost never talked about it because the cabin was old and needed repairs. Harold refused to sell it because his father built it back in the 70s. I kept reading. Then my breath caught. Buried halfway down page 4 was a clause highlighted in yellow marker. In the event that any beneficiary attempts coercion, manipulation, or forced property transfer against Evelyn Carter, said beneficiary forfeits all inheritance rights immediately. I read the sentence 3 times. My heart pounded harder with each word. Harold knew. Not suspected. Knew. The realization settled over me slowly and painfully. My husband had spent the final months of his life quietly preparing to protect me from our own daughter. I pressed a hand against my mouth. Oh, Harold. The attic blurred slightly through fresh tears. I suddenly remembered late nights when Harold stayed downstairs in his office after Rebecca visited. Back then I thought he was distracted by medical bills or retirement paperwork. Now I wondered how much he had truly seen. How much he never told me because he was trying to spare me. Another paper slipped loose from the folder and floated onto the floor beside me. Picked it up carefully. It was dated 8 months before Harold died. A notarized statement. And attached to it, my stomach tightened instantly. Photographs. Rebecca sitting at a restaurant patio with a man in a gray suit. A realtor. I recognized him immediately. Greg Watson. One of the top luxury property agents in Dallas. Why would Rebecca meet privately with a realtor months before Harold even died? I turned over the photograph. Harold had written one sentence on the back. She thought I wouldn't notice. A cold chill moved through my chest. Suddenly every conversation from the past year replayed differently in my mind. Rebecca offering to help simplify finances. Rebecca insisting I should update estate paperwork. Rebecca casually asking whether Harold and I had considered selling before retirement. At the time they felt like harmless questions. Now they looked like pieces of a plan. I closed the folder slowly. For the first time in months, grief began shifting into something else. Not rage. Something steadier. Awareness. I was no longer confused about what was happening. And clarity can be dangerous, especially to people counting on your weakness. Downstairs, my phone suddenly rang again, startling me. I carefully tucked the folder beneath my arm and climbed down from the attic ladder as quickly as my joints allowed. The phone kept ringing. Rebecca. Again. I stared at her name glowing across the screen while thunder shook the windows. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. But another part, the calmer, colder part growing quietly inside me, wanted to hear what she would say next. I answered. What now, Rebecca? A long silence greeted me first. Then her voice came softer than before. Too soft. Manipulative soft. Mom, I think we should start over. I nearly smiled. There it was. The tone children use when they realize control is slipping. I don't think screaming at me on my birthday qualifies as a misunderstanding. I already said I was sorry.
No, he replied calmly.
You said you were frustrated. Another silence. Then, you know what I mean. I walked slowly into the living room while holding Harold's folder tightly against my chest. The storm outside darkened the windows almost black. Rebecca continued carefully. Daniel thinks maybe we all got emotional because of Dad. We're still grieving. Grieving. Interesting choice of words from someone scheduling house photographers behind my back. I see. You've been alone almost a year now, Mom. There it was again. Alone. She kept repeating the word like she needed me to fear it. I'm not helpless. Nobody said you were. But you keep acting like I am. Her patience cracked slightly. I'm trying to think ahead because somebody has to. I looked around the living room slowly. Harold's reading chair still sat beside the fireplace exactly where he left it. His old leather Bible rested on the side table with reading glasses folded neatly on top. This house still carried him everywhere. And suddenly I understood why Rebecca wanted it sold so quickly. Not just for money. Because as long as I stayed here, Harold's presence stayed too. And maybe that made her uncomfortable. Maybe guilt always hates reminders. Mom! I realized Rebecca was still talking. I found a beautiful senior community near Plano, she continued. Private gardens, restaurant dining, medical staff 24/7. No, she stopped. What? I said no. The word came out calm and firm enough that even I barely recognized myself. Rebecca inhaled sharply. You haven't even looked at it. And I'm not going to. You're being irrational. No, I said quietly. I'm finally paying attention. Dead silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Then Rebecca's voice lowered almost to a whisper. What exactly does that mean? I glanced down at the blue folder in my hands. At Harold's handwriting. At the trust documents she clearly knew nothing about. And for the first time since my husband died, I understood something important. Rebecca thought I was weak because I was grieving. She had no idea Harold had already armed me before he left. That night I locked every door in the house. Not because I thought Rebecca would suddenly show up in the storm, but because something inside me no longer felt safe the way it once had. The rain continued past midnight, rattling softly against the windows while I sat alone in Harold's office downstairs. I hadn't touched the room much since he passed. His desk remained exactly the same. Pens lying neatly beside unopened mail. His favorite brass lamp casting warm light across stacks of old paperwork. A faded University of Texas coffee mug still sitting near the printer. For months, walking into this room hurt too much. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like Harold was trying to tell me something. I placed the blue folder carefully on the desk and continued reading through the trust documents. The deeper I looked, the more deliberate everything became. Harold had transferred the house fully into the trust 6 months before his surgery. He had updated beneficiaries, added legal protections, even documented specific conversations. One typed paragraph made my stomach tighten. Rebecca Carter repeatedly initiated discussions regarding premature liquidation of primary residence despite homeowner objections. Premature liquidation. Such cold legal wording for something that felt so deeply personal. I leaned back slowly in Harold's chair. How long had he carried this concern alone? The grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight. I rubbed my tired eyes and kept reading. Then another document caught my attention. A financial summary. Rebecca and Daniel were drowning in debt. Credit loans. Second mortgage refinancing. Business losses tied to Daniel's construction company. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. They looked successful from the outside. Luxury vacations. Expensive dinners. Designer handbags Rebecca posted constantly online. But behind it all, they were collapsing financially. And my house, my home, looked like their escape plan. Suddenly everything made horrible sense. The pressure. The fake concern. The urgency. Rebecca didn't want me comfortable. She needed me gone. A painful ache spread through my chest. Not because of the money. Because she had looked me in the eyes for months while secretly calculating my future like a business transaction. My phone buzzed against the desk. A text message. Tyler. Grandma, are you okay? I stared at the message for a long moment. Sweet boy. Unlike his mother, Tyler still led with his heart. I typed back carefully.
I'm all right, sweetheart.
You don't need to worry about me. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, Mom's just stressed lately. Dad too. I closed my eyes briefly. Children always try to make broken things sound smaller than they are. I replied, I know. Another pause. Then Tyler sent one final message. I heard them arguing about the house before your birthday dinner. My fingers stopped moving instantly. A cold feeling settled over me. Before the birthday dinner. So this wasn't impulsive. It was planned. I typed slowly. What did you hear? Several seconds passed. Then, Mom said if you sold the house, everything would finally fall into place. I stared at the screen. Fall into place. As if my displacement was the missing puzzle piece to her perfect life. Another message appeared. Please don't tell her I told you. My heart softened painfully. Of course he was scared. Families like ours teach children to protect tension instead of confronting it. I replied gently, I won't. Thank you for being honest with me. The typing bubble appeared again. Then disappeared. Finally. Grandpa wouldn't want you leaving that house. That one broke me a little. Tears blurred my vision as I set the phone down carefully beside Harold's papers. Even Tyler understood. At 16 years old, he understood something my 50-year-old daughter refused to see. A house is not just walls. It's memory. It's sacrifice. It's the physical shape of a life shared with someone you loved. I stood and walked toward the office window. Rainwater slid down the glass in silver streaks beneath the porch light. The backyard looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. The oak tree Harold planted. The bird feeder he built with Tyler when he was little. The garden beds we ruined every spring trying to grow tomatoes in stubborn Texas heat. A life existed here. Not an asset. Not an investment opportunity. A life. And suddenly, for the first time since Harold died, I felt anger. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind that arrives after grief finally clears enough to reveal betrayal underneath. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows while I made coffee. For once, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt alert. Like I had finally woken up inside my own life again. At around 10 o'clock, another knock sounded at the front door. This time it was my neighbor Martha Jensen, 74 years old. Sharp as broken glass and impossible to intimidate. She held a peach pie in one hand. Heard yelling last night, she said immediately while walking inside without waiting for permission. Figured either somebody died or your daughter visited. Despite everything, I laughed softly. Martha narrowed her eyes at me. What happened? I hesitated. Then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I told her everything. The birthday dinner. The photographer. The trust. The pressure to sell. Martha listened silently while setting the pie onto the counter. When I finally finished, her expression turned colder than I'd ever seen. That girl's been sniffing around this property for months. I froze. What? Martha crossed her arms. 3 weeks ago I saw Rebecca walking the fence line with some man in a suit. Thought maybe you knew. My stomach dropped. A realtor? Probably. The room suddenly felt smaller. How long? I whispered. Martha looked at me carefully. Evie, exactly how much access does your daughter have to your finances? A chill ran down my spine. Because for the first time, another terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if Rebecca wasn't only trying to take the house? What if she had already started taking other things too? Top of form, bottom of form. Martha's question stayed with me long after she left. Exactly how much access does your daughter have to your finances? I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the untouched peach pie she brought over, my coffee growing cold beside it. The answer should have been simple. But suddenly it wasn't. Rebecca had helped me organize paperwork after Harold died. She knew where I kept passwords written down. She had access to emergency contacts, insurance files, even some banking information during the weeks after the funeral when I could barely think clearly enough to pay bills. At the time I was grateful. Now I felt sick. I walked slowly toward the downstairs office again, my chest tight with growing unease. The filing cabinet beside Harold's desk held years of records organized with almost military precision. Harold believed paperwork prevented disasters. People panic, he used to say, because they ignore details. I opened the top drawer carefully. Bank statements, retirement accounts, utility bills. Everything looked normal at first glance. But now I wasn't looking like a grieving widow. I was looking like someone searching for damage. Outside, the morning sun warmed the backyard windows, But inside the office I suddenly felt cold. I pulled out the most recent checking account statement and sat down slowly. Then another. Then another. My eyes moved line by line across the transactions. Groceries. Electric bill. Insurance payment. Then I froze. 3 months ago. Wire transfer. $8,500. I frowned immediately. I would never wire that kind of money without remembering it. I grabbed another statement. 2 months ago. Wire transfer $12,000. My pulse quickened. A third statement. 1 month ago. Online transfer. $5,400. My hands began trembling. No. 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 I shuffled through more pages desperately. There were dozens. Not huge enough individually to trigger alarms, but together over $40,000. Gone. The room tilted slightly around me. I gripped the edge of Harold's desk hard enough to hurt my fingers. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Harold moved money before he died. Maybe I forgot something. But deep down I already knew. I reached for the folder containing account authorization records. And there it was. Rebecca Carter. Secondary emergency access. Added 11 months ago during Harold's hospitalization. I closed my eyes. God. Harold had been fighting for his life while Rebecca quietly gained access to ours. The realization hollowed something inside me. Not because of the money. Because betrayal from strangers wounds your pride. Betrayal from your child wounds your identity. I heard Harold's voice suddenly in my memory. Evie trusts people with love. Never with paperwork. At the time I laughed. Now I understood. My phone buzzed loudly against the desk, nearly making me jump. Rebecca. Again. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. What? Her tone immediately sharpened. Well, good morning to you too. I said nothing. Rebecca exhaled dramatically. Daniel stopped by your neighborhood earlier. My stomach tightened instantly. What for? To check on you. That was a lie. I knew it immediately. Daniel never did anything involving conflict unless Rebecca pushed him into it. He said your car was gone this morning. I went grocery shopping. Another lie. I hadn't left the house. Silence stretched between us. Then Rebecca lowered her voice carefully. Mom, are you going through financial documents? Every muscle in my body went still. How would you know that? A pause. Too long. Then, I just had a feeling. No, not a feeling. Fear. She was afraid I had finally started looking. I leaned back slowly in Harold's chair. For the first time since this began, I stopped sounding wounded. I sounded calm. You've taken money from my accounts. Dead silence. Then a soft laugh. Disbelieving. Oh my God. Martha Jensen put this in your head, didn't she? Interesting. Not denial. Deflection. I'm looking at the transfers right now. Mom, those were temporary. Temporary. The word hit me like ice water. You stole from me. I borrowed money, she snapped. There's a difference. My chest tightened painfully. How much? Another silence. Then, we were going to pay it back after the house sold. There it was again. The house. Everything always came back to the house. Like my entire existence had become collateral for their failures. I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead. How long has this been happening? We needed help after Daniel's business problems. So you robbed your widowed mother? Stop saying it like that. Her voice cracked sharply now. Do you have any idea how hard things have been for us? Tyler's tuition, the loans, the taxes. And you thought I owed you my home too. You don't understand.
No. Y interrupta quietly.
I finally do. The silence between us turned dangerous. Then Rebecca's tone changed completely. Cold. You know. What your problem is, Mom. I waited. You care more about a stupid house than your actual family. The words landed harder than I expected. Because somewhere deep inside me I realized she truly believed that. In her mind I was selfish for refusing to sacrifice everything quietly. I looked around Harold's office slowly. The framed wedding photo on the bookshelf. The old clock ticking beside his desk. 42 years of marriage preserved inside these walls. And suddenly, clarity arrived with terrifying sharpness. Rebecca didn't value this home because she never understood what built it. Sacrifice means nothing to people who only arrive for the reward. You took advantage of me while I was grieving, I said softly. Oh please, Mom. Don't turn this into some dramatic betrayal story. Too late. It already was. I opened the trust folder slowly while holding the phone against my ear. My eyes landed again on the highlighted clause Harold had prepared months before he died. Any beneficiary attempting coercion or financial manipulation forfeits inheritance, rights immediately. Rebecca kept talking angrily, but her voice suddenly sounded far away now, because for the first time I realized something she didn't. She thought I was powerless. She had no idea her father already saw exactly what she was capable of, and he had left me the means to destroy her future with a single phone call. I didn't make the phone call that day. Not yet. I sat alone in Harold's office long after Rebecca hung up on me, staring at the trust documents spread across the desk. Outside, sunlight poured across the backyard. The storm had passed completely, leaving the grass shining with rainwater and the oak tree gently swaying in the warm afternoon breeze. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside me, something had shifted permanently. For 11 months, grief had made me passive, soft, confused. But betrayal has a strange way of waking people up. I folded the trust papers carefully and returned them to the blue folder. Then I opened my banking app again. $43,600. Gone. Tiny withdrawals at first, then larger ones once Rebecca realized I wasn't paying close attention anymore. I stared at the numbers without blinking. A part of me still wanted to excuse her somehow. Maybe desperation changed people. Maybe fear did too. But another part, the quieter, steadier part growing stronger every hour, understood something painful. People reveal who they truly are when they think you're too weak to stop them. The phone rang again around 3 o'clock. This time it wasn't Rebecca. It was Daniel. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Hello. His voice sounded nervous immediately. Evelyn, hey. He never called me Evelyn. Always Mom. The change told me everything before the conversation even began. What do you want, Daniel? A long pause. I heard you and Rebecca had another argument. Interesting way to describe theft. He exhaled heavily. Look, things got out of hand. How long have you known she was taking money? Silence. My answer. I closed my eyes briefly. You knew. Evelyn, you watched your wife steal from me after I buried my husband. It wasn't like that. I almost laughed. That sentence appears in every betrayal eventually. It wasn't like that. As though different wording somehow changes the wound itself. She intended to pay it back, he continued carefully. With my house. Another silence. I could practically hear him realizing there was no good way out anymore. Finally, he lowered his voice. Rebecca's under a lot of pressure. So was Harold while he was dying. That stopped him cold. The room went completely silent except for the ticking clock on the bookshelf. Then Daniel spoke again, softer this time. She's scared.
No, he replied calmly.
She's greedy. He inhaled sharply. That's not fair. Isn't it? I stood and walked slowly toward the office window. Across the street, children rode bicycles through puddles left by the storm. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower hummed steadily. Normal life continuing while families quietly broke apart behind closed doors. I loved Rebecca enough to trust her, I said quietly. That was my mistake. Daniel's voice dropped almost to a whisper. She thinks you care more about the house than you do about us. I looked around Harold's office again. The photographs, the books, the life built here. Then I answered honestly. No. I think Rebecca cares more about money than she does about me. He didn't deny it. That hurt more than yelling would have. Finally, he sighed heavily. What are you going to do? There it was. The real question. Not, how are you feeling? Not, can we fix this? What are you going to do? Meaning, how much trouble are we in? I let the silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I answered calmly. I haven't decided yet. After we hung up, I stood motionless beside the window. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt clear. Painfully clear. For the first time in nearly a year, my grief no longer controlled the room. Truth did. That evening, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited since Harold's funeral. Miller and Associates. The law office Harold trusted for almost 30 years. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently. "It's good to see you again." I smiled politely, though my stomach twisted painfully beneath my coat. "Is Richard available?" Richard Miller had handled our estate paperwork for years. He and Harold played golf together every spring until Harold's health declined. 10 minutes later, I sat across from him in a quiet office smelling faintly of coffee and old paper. Richard looked older than I remembered. Or maybe grief simply makes everyone look older. "I had a feeling I might see you eventually," he said carefully after reviewing the trust folder. I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" He removed his glasses slowly. Harold was worried. The words landed heavily. "How worried?" Richard hesitated. Then he opened a drawer and removed another envelope. My name was written across the front in Harold's handwriting. A chill moved through me instantly. "He asked me to hold on to this," Richard said quietly. "Only if certain things started happening." My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Short, direct. "Evie, if Rebecca pressures you about the house, accesses your money, or tries to move you out before you're ready, I need you to promise me something. Fight back. Not for the property. For your dignity. You spent 42 years helping build this family. Do not let anyone make you feel disposable after I'm gone." I read the note twice before lowering it slowly. Tears burned behind my eyes again. Richard leaned forward carefully. "There's more you should know." I looked up. "The trust doesn't only protect the house," he said quietly. "Harold included specific legal penalties for financial exploitation." My heartbeat slowed. "What kind of penalties?" Richard folded his hands together. "If Rebecca accessed your accounts improperly, she can be removed entirely from the trust." I stared at him. "Entirely.
No inheritance.
No property. Nothing." A long silence filled the office. Then Richard added something that made my blood run cold. "And Evelyn based on what Harold documented before his death." He paused carefully. "I think he suspected Rebecca would eventually try something much worse than taking money." Top of form, I drove home from Richard Miller's office in complete silence. The sun had already begun sinking behind the trees, painting the Texas sky in deep orange and gold. Traffic moved slowly through downtown, headlights flickering on one by one as evening settled over the city. Usually, Harold loved drives at sunset. He'd roll the windows down even in winter just to smell the air changing at dusk. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. God, I missed him. Not in the fragile way I had during the funeral. Not in the hollow way I missed hearing footsteps upstairs. This was different. Now I missed him because he had seen danger coming long before I did. And somehow, even while dying, he tried to protect me from it. The realization sat heavily in my chest all the way home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. Warm porch light glowing softly. Flower pots lining the walkway. Harold's wind chime swaying gently near the front steps. But now I saw something else too. Rebecca saw $signs when she looked at this place. I saw 42 years of survival. Inside, the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt observant. Almost waiting. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and slowly removed Harold's note from my coat pocket again. Fight back. Not for the property. For your dignity. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I finally did something I should have done months ago. I stopped feeling guilty. That was the strange thing about motherhood. Even after betrayal, part of you still searches for ways to blame yourself first. Maybe I was too distant. Maybe I spoiled her too much. Maybe grief made her panic. But sitting alone in my kitchen while the refrigerator hummed softly behind me, clarity arrived with brutal simplicity. Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing, and she kept doing it because she thought I would never stop her. My phone buzzed again around 7:30. This time I ignored it completely. Another buzz. Then another. Finally, a voicemail notification appeared. I played it on speaker while pouring myself tea. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous," Rebecca snapped immediately. "You're embarrassing us. Daniel said you went to Richard Miller's office today. Why would you involve lawyers?" I paused mid-motion. How did she know that? A cold feeling slid slowly through my stomach. Then she continued. If Martha's filling your head with paranoid nonsense, maybe you should remember she's been bitter ever since her kids stopped visiting. I stared out the dark kitchen window. Interesting. Rebecca sounded nervous. Not angry. Nervous. And honestly, she added sharply, Dad wouldn't want this family tearing itself apart over money. I almost laughed out loud at that. Harold literally built legal protections against her. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. The voicemail ended with one final sentence. Call me before you make things worse. I set the phone down gently. Worse for who? That was the question she never asked herself. I carried my tea into the living room and sat beside the fireplace. The old grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. For the first time in nearly a year, I began noticing things beyond grief. The wear in Harold's leather chair. The faint smell of cedarwood from the bookshelf. The softness of the lamplight across family photographs. Life still existed here. Not just memories. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Rebecca wasn't only trying to take my house. She was trying to erase the final place where Harold still existed fully. That thought hardened something inside me permanently. The next morning I woke before sunrise.
No tears. No heaviness.
Just purpose. I dressed carefully in cream slacks and a navy sweater Harold always liked, then drove directly to First National Bank. The young banker greeted me politely as I requested a private office. Within an hour, every account password had been changed. Rebecca's emergency access was revoked entirely. New security alerts were placed on every transfer above $500. The banker looked concerned while reviewing recent account activity. Mrs. Carter, would you like us to open a fraud investigation? I hesitated. The word fraud sounded so ugly attached to my daughter. But truth doesn't become softer just because we avoid naming it. Not yet, I said quietly. Yet. That word mattered. When I returned home around noon, a black Mercedes sat parked outside my house. Rebecca. Of course. I sat in my car for a moment watching her pace across the porch with her phone pressed tightly against her ear. Even from a distance, I could recognize panic in her movements now. The moment she saw my car, she ended the call abruptly. I stepped out slowly. What are you doing here? Rebecca forced a smile that looked painfully unnatural. We need to talk.
No, he replied calmly.
You need something. Her expression flickered instantly. For a second, I saw the real Rebecca beneath the polished surface. Tired. Desperate. Cornered. Then the mask returned. You changed the bank accounts. Not a question. A complaint. Yes. You had no right to shut me out like that. I stared at her in disbelief. My accounts. Mom, I was helping you manage things. You were draining $40,000 from a grieving widow. Her face hardened immediately. There it is again. The victim act. Victim act. The phrase hit me harder than I expected. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed exactly how she justified all of this to herself. In her mind, my pain was inconvenient drama standing between her and the life she wanted. I walked past her toward the front door. Rebecca followed quickly. You're overreacting. I stopped suddenly and turned to face her. For the first time since Harold died, I looked directly into my daughter's eyes without fear. No, I said quietly. You just underestimated me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Rebecca looked afraid. Top of form, bottom of form. Rebecca stood frozen on the porch after I closed the front door. For a moment, neither of us moved. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors behind me, while tension settled heavily between us like smoke after a fire. Then she laughed. A short, brittle sound. You're seriously threatening your own daughter over money? I almost answered immediately. But something stopped me. Because this was never truly about money. It was about entitlement. About a child who slowly convinced herself that love meant ownership. I placed my purse calmly on the hallway table. You stole from me. I borrowed it. You scheduled photographers to list my home without permission. You're twisting everything. Her voice echoed sharply through the foyer. The same foyer where Harold once carried Rebecca inside after she broke her arm roller skating at age 10. The same foyer where we hugged her before prom. The same place she stood now looking at me like an obstacle instead of a mother. I suddenly felt very tired. Not weak. Just finished. I want you to leave, I said quietly. Rebecca blinked in disbelief. What? You heard me. Her expression darkened instantly. Oh my God. Martha and Richard have completely poisoned you.
No, irraplia calmly.
The truth did. That silenced her. For one brief second, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then came anger. Real anger. You know what? She snapped.
Fine.
Let's stop pretending. I crossed my arms slowly. Pretending what? That this situation makes sense. She gestured wildly around the house. This place is enormous. You live here alone while the rest of us struggle.
Is er here?
You have a lake cabin. That's different. How? Because we earned it. The words hung in the air between us. I almost smiled at the irony. Earned it. Not the money she transferred from my accounts. Not the future she planned using my house. Not the inheritance she was already spending in her head. Earned. You think I didn't earn this home? I asked softly. Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically. Mom, that's not what I mean. No. I think it is. The room grew quiet again. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. A lawn sprinkler ticked rhythmically nearby. Normal suburban sounds continuing while generations quietly destroyed each other inside family homes. Rebecca suddenly softened her voice again. The performance voice. The one she used when she realized rage wasn't working. Mom, please. I said nothing. She stepped closer. You have to understand how much pressure we're under. There it is again. What? You keep explaining your problems like they justify what you did. Her jaw tightened. You have no idea what our finances look like. I know enough. That startled her. What does that mean? I held her gaze steadily. I know about the loans. Silence. Cold and immediate. Rebecca's face drained slightly of color. Then she recovered quickly. So Daniel talked. No. Your paperwork did. Now real fear appeared. Not grief. Not guilt. Fear. Because she suddenly realized something dangerous. I was paying attention now. Her voice dropped lower. How much do you know? Enough. Rebecca looked away for the first time since entering the house. That alone told me everything. People avoid eye contact when they know the truth has finally arrived. She walked slowly into the living room and pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. I didn't plan for things to get this bad. The honesty surprised me. I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence makes people reveal more than questions ever could. Rebecca laughed bitterly under her breath. Daniel's business collapsed last year. We refinanced twice trying to save it. Then Tyler's tuition increased. Then the IRS problems happened and you stole from me. She spun around sharply. Would you stop saying that? Why? Because it sounds ugly. Because I'm your daughter. There it was. The shield she believed would always protect her. Family. As though blood automatically erased consequences. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. Real ones this time. I was scared, she whispered. For one dangerous moment my heart softened. Because no matter what she had done, some part of me still remembered holding her feverish little body against my chest at 3 a.m. Still remembered braiding her hair before elementary school. Still remembered teaching her how to drive in an empty church parking lot. Mothers never stop carrying old versions of their children, even when those children disappear. Rebecca looked at me desperately. We can fix this. I said nothing. We'll pay everything back after the house sells. And just like that, the softness vanished. Guys, even now, even standing in the wreckage of trust and betrayal, she still came back to the house. Not apology. Not remorse. The house. I looked toward Harold's chair beside the fireplace. Then back at my daughter. No, I said quietly. Rebecca stared at me. No. The house is not being sold. Her face hardened immediately. You can't seriously think you'll manage this place forever. I don't need forever. You're being selfish. I almost laughed. The woman stealing from her widowed mother was calling me selfish. Remarkable. Rebecca took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. Then she said something that changed everything. If you don't sell willingly, she said quietly, things are going to become very difficult. The room went completely still.
He stared at her carefully.
Was that a threat? Her eyes widened slightly. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. You always twist my words.
No, irraplia sufli.
I finally started hearing them clearly. Rebecca opened her mouth to argue again, then suddenly froze. A car had pulled into the driveway outside. We both turned instinctively toward the front window. A dark sedan. Richard Miller stepped out holding a leather briefcase. Rebecca's face went pale. Instantly. Because deep down, she already knew why Harold's lawyer was here. Rebecca's face lost all color the moment she recognized Richard Miller stepping out of the sedan. For the first time since this began, my daughter looked genuinely frightened. Not frustrated. Not defensive. Afraid. Richard adjusted his suit jacket calmly and walked toward the front porch with the same quiet confidence Harold always admired in him. Beside me, Rebecca whispered. What is he doing here? I didn't answer. Because honestly, I wanted her to sit with that fear for a moment. The front doorbell rang once. Clean. Sharp. Rebecca immediately grabbed my arm. Mom, don't do this. I slowly looked down at her hand gripping my sleeve. The same hand that signed transfers from my bank account. The same hand that scheduled photographers to sell my home behind my back. I gently pulled away. You already did this, Rebecca. Then I opened the door. Richard offered me a small nod. Evelyn. Richard. His eyes shifted briefly toward Rebecca standing frozen in the living room. He understood everything immediately. Good lawyers usually do. Rebecca forced a tight smile. Richard. I didn't realize you were coming over. No, he replied calmly. I imagine you didn't. The silence that followed turned razor sharp. I stepped aside quietly. Please come in. Richard entered slowly, carrying the leather briefcase against his side. Rebecca crossed her arms defensively. If this is about the trust, I already told Mom we can work everything out privately. Richard removed his glasses carefully. I don't believe you can. Her jaw tightened instantly. This is still a family matter.
No, Richard replied.
It became a legal matter the moment funds were removed from Evelyn's accounts without proper authorization. Rebecca's breathing visibly changed. Shorter now. Faster. You're making it sound criminal. Richard held her gaze steadily. That depends entirely on how this proceeds. I walked quietly into the kitchen while they spoke. Oddly enough, I no longer felt emotional. No shaking. No panique. Just exhaustion finally settling into clarity. I poured myself a glass of water while Rebecca's voice sharpened behind me. Mom gave me access. Emergency access, Richard corrected calmly. Not unrestricted personal use. We intended to repay everything. With proceeds from a forced property sale, Richard replied. Silence. Then Rebecca laughed bitterly. Oh my God. You people are acting like I robbed a stranger. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. That inability to understand the real wound. The money mattered far less than the betrayal itself. Richard's voice lowered. Your father anticipated this situation. That hit her harder than anything else. Rebecca visibly stiffened. What does that mean? I slowly returned to the living room. Richard opened his briefcase and removed several documents. The Carter family trust contains a forfeiture clause. Rebecca frowned. A what? Richard laid the paperwork carefully across the coffee table. In the event any beneficiary attempts coercion, financial exploitation, or property manipulation involving Evelyn Carter, he paused slightly. Said beneficiary immediately forfeits inheritance rights. The room went completely still. Rebecca stared at him blankly. Then at me. Then back at the papers. No, Richard remained calm. Your father personally added the clause 8 months before his death. No, she repeated more sharply. That's impossible. I watched something terrifying happen in my daughter's face then. Not sadness. Not regret. Calculation. Her mind racing through consequences. The house. The accounts. The inheritance. All slipping away at once. Rebecca turned toward me desperately. Mom, you can't actually let this happen. I said nothing. Tears filled her eyes instantly. You're choosing paperwork over your own daughter? The sentence almost would have worked once. Months ago, I might have collapsed beneath the guilt of it. But now I saw the manipulation clearly. every word carefully designed to drag me back into emotional confusion. Richard spoke before I could answer.
No, Rebecca.
Your mother is choosing dignity over intimidation. That made her snap completely. This is ridiculous, she shouted. Dad wouldn't destroy his family over one mistake. One mistake? I asked quietly. She froze. I stepped closer slowly. You stole from me while I was grieving your father. Rebecca opened her mouth. You tried to sell my home without permission. Her expression cracked further. You pushed me toward assisted living before I was even ready. Mom. And on my 70th birthday, my voice trembled for the first time. You told me to die alone. The room fell silent again. Rebecca's breathing turned uneven. For one brief moment I finally saw shame appear. Real shame. Not fear of losing money. Fear of seeing herself clearly. She sank slowly onto the couch. I didn't mean it. But we both knew she had. Maybe not fully. Maybe not consciously. But cruelty always reveals truth eventually. Richard quietly slid another paper across the table. There's one more issue. Rebecca looked up slowly. The trust also removes your authority regarding future medical or housing decisions for Evelyn. Her eyes widened. What? Your father reassigned power of attorney 6 months ago. My heart skipped. Even I hadn't known that part. Rebecca stood abruptly. To who? Richard looked directly at me before answering. Evelyn herself. Silence. Then something almost tragic crossed Rebecca's face. Because for the first time in her life, no one could control the outcome anymore. Not guilt. Not pressure. Not fear. Nothing. She looked at me like she was suddenly seeing a stranger. And perhaps she was. Because the grieving widow she counted on disappearing quietly no longer existed. I met my daughter's eyes steadily. Then I said the words she never believed she'd hear from me. You need to leave my house. Rebecca stared at me as though I had slapped her. You need to leave my house. The sentence hung between us in complete silence. Behind her, evening light stretched across the living room floor in long golden lines. Harold's clock ticked steadily beside the fireplace, calm and unbothered, while my daughter stood in the center of the room realizing something she never imagined possible. She no longer had power here. Rebecca's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out at first. Then finally, you're serious? Yes. Her eyes darted toward Richard desperately. This is insane. Richard calmly closed his briefcase.
No, Rebecca.
This is consequence. That word landed hard. Consequence. Not punishment. Not revenge. Simply consequence. Rebecca turned back toward me, anger returning now that panic wasn't working. So that's it, she snapped. You're throwing away your relationship with your daughter over a misunderstanding? I almost smiled sadly. Even now, she still needed this to be smaller than it was. A misunderstanding. As though betrayal were just confusion with unfortunate timing. I looked at her quietly. You stopped being honest with me long before the money disappeared. Silence. You looked at me grieving your father and saw opportunity. Her face tightened instantly. That's not fair.
No, irraplia sufli.
None of this was. For a moment nobody moved. Then Rebecca grabbed her purse from the couch sharply. Fine. The word cracked with humiliation. If that's how you want it. She headed toward the front door, heels striking hard against the hardwood floor Harold spent 3 summers installing by hand. Right. Before reaching the door she stopped. Without turning around she whispered, You'll regret this when you're alone. The sentence should have hurt me. Months ago it would have. Because loneliness terrified me after Harold died. But now? Now I understood something important. Being alone is painful. Being surrounded by people who quietly erase your dignity is worse. Rebecca opened the door. Then paused again. What am I supposed to tell Tyler? I answered honestly. The truth. She left without another word. A moment later, her Mercedes backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Gone. Just like that. The silence afterward felt enormous. Richard stood quietly near the fireplace while I lowered myself slowly into Harold's chair. For the first time in nearly a year, the house no longer felt heavy with grief. Felt still. Clear. Like a storm had finally passed through. Richard loosened his tie slightly. How are you holding up? I looked around the room carefully before answering. The framed photographs. The bookshelves. The blanket folded over Harold's chair arm. Home. I honestly don't know yet, I admitted. And that was the truth. Because losing your child emotionally feels strangely similar to mourning the dead. You keep remembering older versions of them.
Kinderversions.
Smaller versions. Before life hardened whatever softness once existed. Richard gave me a sympathetic nod. Harold loved you very much. That one nearly broke me. I looked down at my hands quietly. I know. And for what it's worth, he added gently, he would have been proud of you today. Tears finally filled my eyes again then. Not because I felt weak. Because after months of feeling invisible inside my own life, someone finally saw me again. Richard left shortly after sunset. When the front door closed behind him, I stood alone in the entryway listening to the familiar quiet settle through the house. But tonight the silence felt different. Not empty. Peaceful. I locked the door carefully, then walked room to room turning on small lamps the way Harold liked during evenings. Kitchen. Living room. Hallway. Soft golden light slowly filled the home we built together. Our home. Not an asset. Not a transaction. Not a retirement plan for someone else. Ours. I paused in front of the hallway photographs again. Rebecca at age 8 smiling beside her first bicycle. Rebecca graduating college. Rebecca holding newborn Tyler in her arms. While Harold cried beside her in the hospital room. I touched the frame gently. Love does not disappear just because trust does. That's the cruelest part of family betrayal. You still love people long after they stop protecting your heart. My phone buzzed softly in my sweater pocket. Tyler. I answered immediately. Grandma. His voice sounded nervous. Isuadhart. A long pause. Then quietly. Mom came home crying. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm sorry. Another pause. Then. Did she really take your money? Children deserve honesty too. Yes. Tyler inhaled shakily. I told her she should apologize. My chest tightened painfully. What did she say? That you turned everyone against her. I looked toward the dark kitchen window where my reflection stared back faintly. Older now. Sadder perhaps. But no longer confused. I didn't turn anyone against your mother, I said softly. She made choices. Silence stretched gently between us. Then Tyler whispered something that made tears slide quietly down my face. Grandpa used to say you were the strongest person in the family. I couldn't speak for a second. Finally I managed. He loved you very much. I know. Another pause. Then. Can I still come visit you? That one shattered whatever remained of my heart. Yes, I whispered immediately. Always. After we hung up, I carried a blanket onto the back porch. The Texas night air felt warm against my skin as I settled into Harold's old rocking chair. Crickets hummed softly in the darkness. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled faintly beyond the hills. I looked out across the backyard we spent decades building together. The oak tree. The garden beds. The wind chimes moving gently in the breeze. Harold had been right. This house protected me. Not because of its walls. Because it reminded me who I was before grief made me forget. I was not a burden waiting quietly to disappear. I was the woman who helped build this life with her own hands. And for the first time since my husband died, I finally believed it again. Bottom of form.